Awesome. So I'll share the screen again. Awesome. So welcome everyone. Once more, we're on session 3 of our Salesforce Flows learning series. So yeah, I mean, two sessions over, but it seems like already a mountain of information. And as we were just hearing, everybody's excited to hear what's in store today. So to start off again, a huge thank you to all of you. We're really making this a success by all of you taking out your time, participating. The engagement level has been fantastic. Everybody has been giving so much of positive feedback that it just makes us really grateful and happy to be here. So once more, just a huge thank you. Our speakers obviously are all familiar to you now. William and Olivier are our superstars, both working at Slalom. They have 11x certifications each and are our Flow superstars. So I'm not going to keep repeating the introductions, but we are really thankful for them to have spent so much time, and we can see the thought that has gone into preparing the content and the effort they put in. So just again, a big thank you, William and Olivia. For our group, yeah, I'm Prashant, and our colleagues Sudha and Neil. Our LinkedIn, Twitter handles are all here, so feel free to connect with us, reach out to us. I'll also post the link to our community group as well as the chatter group in the chat, so you can join in case you have not joined. It'll be there for you to get notifications, see the recordings, slide decks, and so on. And again, a big thanks to Slalom for hosting the Zoom link for these sessions. So they are Zoom sponsor host for this entire series. Again, a quick summary of the agenda. We're already into our kickoff. And today we're going to cover stream flows. Got a few bullet points off the agenda, but I'm sure William and Olivia may have updated those and made it even more exciting. We're going to wrap up at around 6:30, maybe a little earlier with the Q&A. And at the end, we will have a lucky draw for 2 certification vouchers. And just as a quick house rules, turn on your camera if it's appropriate. Do mute your microphone unless advised. Feel free to post your questions on chat. We will try to see if those gets answered during the session itself, and feel free to interact and engage, right? If you have some experience or inputs or insights or additional questions you want to share, this is the forum. We are a very friendly crowd, so definitely use the chat to participate and network. And of course, needless to say, be polite and respectful. And like I said, towards the end, we will have a spin wheel giving a lucky draw for 2 certification vouchers. So you do need to be present when we do that spin wheel. So do stay tuned till the end for that. And with that, and not really trying to keep you away from the real content, let's get started, and I'll stop sharing and let William and Olivier take it from here. So thank you, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Prashant. Let me share my screen. And actually, restart this. Share screen. Okay. Are you guys seeing the full screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, cool.
Yes,
thank you. All right, so welcome to that session number 3 again, and quickly just thanks to everyone for attending this session. We know this is quite a commitment to have 4 sessions within a month, but we appreciate you being there. And again, thanks to Prashant and all the organizers for this. So just a recap on what we've seen so far and where we're at and what's the agenda. So today we're in session 3. We're going to talk about screen flows. We had 2 sessions already, flow overview to introduce the general concepts of flow. And last week we had a session on record triggered flow. And next week will be our last session where we'll do a recap of everything we've seen so far, and we'll cover a bit more advanced concepts, and we'll share some tips and tricks to leverage the knowledge that you've acquired throughout those sessions. So the agenda for today, as you mentioned, Prashant, it's a bit different from what we communicated initially. It might seem less, but that's actually the same content. It's just that we've restructured it a bit, but we're going to cover mostly the same elements that what Prashant showed. And today we're going to start with the review of the exercise that was provided last week for the record trigger flow. So we're going to spend just a couple of minutes on that to go through the solution, and then we'll jump into our ScreenFlow session. We'll also have an exercise for this session today, and we'll cover the solution next week. And as usual, we'll have a Q&A portion. So let me go to the next slide, and just to recap the scenario that we had, and after that, I'm going to jump to the org and show you the flow that I've built to address this. So in order to improve prioritization of cases, the customer support manager at OW Telco has requested that the case priority is automatically set based on specific business rules. So right there, you can know that you're going to have to do something with cases and priority, because we're talking about case priority. More precisely, the service manager would like cases that are assigned to VIP accounts to be flagged as high priority. All other cases can be flagged as normal, except if they don't have an account linked. In that case, they should be flagged as low priority. And then we had a second bullet point, in addition of the previous, when a case is closed, if the account is associated to the case as a VIP, the service manager wants an email to be sent to the customer and a task to be created 5 days after the case closure. So, let me actually go out of this. If you, right at reading those requirements, if you were there last week, you should know that the end solution for this is going to be two flows. And that's what I'm going to show in a bit. But the main reason why is that second bullet point, as you're seeing here, we're saying we want to create a task and send an email. And if you recall, we said that in a before save flow, we cannot do that. And our first bullet point is mainly about updating fields on the cases. So our first bullet point can be accomplished with a before trigger flow, whereas the second one is an after trigger flow. So that will end up in two different the flows. So let's have a look at the first one to address the first bullet point, which is how can we set the priority based on the account associated to the case. So let's first have a look at the configure start element here. So obviously the object on which we're going to base the flow is case, right? Because we want to trigger that flow on the case object. Then the timing of when the flow should be triggered is when a record is created or updated, because it was not specified in the use case, but let's say the account on the case might change from when it was created. So if you change the account after the case was created, you might want to reevaluate the priority. So you might want to trigger that flow on an update call as well. Then I have included here entry conditions. The reason for that is we don't want the flow to be triggered when it's not needed, right? So, and if you recall the conditions that we had in the scenarios where if the account is a VIP account, then we want to trigger a specific priority. If the case doesn't have any account, then we want to set a specific priority. And so basically the condition here is saying, is the case new? So is new is the formula that is basically, it's a function that is assessing, is the case new? And if not, has the value in the account ID changed? So basically we're covering the two scenarios here. If the case is created, then the condition is going to be met because of that is new. If the case was updated, then we only want to trigger that flow if the account was changed, because our priority is based on the account. So let's say we change the account from A to B, then we want to trigger that flow. We change the account from A to nothing because we want to remove the account for some reason, then this is going to be triggered. When to run the flow for updated records. Here, the we have a choice, but actually it's not really a choice. You should select every time a record is updated and meets the condition requirement. The reason for that is because we're using the is changed here, it's already implicit that we're doing that. And actually, if you try to select that, click done and save, you're gonna have an error because the system is not gonna let you do that. So I'm pretty sure this is something that Salesforce is gonna fix at some point, and they're gonna gray out that option. Because formula is a brand new feature, I'm pretty sure that this is something that they've missed.
And William,
they haven't rolled out.
are you able to zoom a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Is that better, or do you want me to zoom again?
Even more a bit.
One more step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Better? All right.
Sweet.
Cool. And then just wanted also to mention here, the reason I've used a formula in that condition requirement is because if you use, for example, the regular end, we cannot access fields on the parent. So for example, I want to use the VIP account, the VIP field on the account. I cannot access those fields in the regular all conditions are met. So this is why I have to go with the formula route, because this is the only way I can access the parent value. So yeah, and then optimize the flow for, as I mentioned, because here in that specific scenario, we want to only update field on the case, which is the priority. There is no need to do an after save. We want the flow to be as performant as possible. So we're going to do a fast field update because, again, the only thing we're doing is an update on the record that triggered the flow. So after that, the first thing that we're basically checking is our condition. So we're adding an if here, a check decision. And the first decision is the account a VIP? And basically, we're determining if the account is a VIP by checking the record, then the account associated to the record, and more specifically, the VIP account checkbox. And if that checkbox is true, then it means that the account is a VIP, which is the name of the path that we've given here. If the account linked to the record, so the case is null and equal true, meaning that the account ID is null, then it means that there is no account. And then if none of those two decisions are met, then this is the default outcome. And what we're doing based out of that is if the account is a VIP, because of the requirements that we were given, we're going to set the priority on the case. So I have added an update records element, and I'm setting the priority to high because this is the requirement that you were given. Then if there is no account, again, because of the requirements, we said that the priority should be low. So we set the priority to low with an update element. And then if none of those two decisions are true, it means that we have an account, but the account is not a VIP. So it goes to the default outcome. And in that case, we're going to set the priority as normal, according to the requirements that we were given again. So that is for the first flow. I just want to mention one last thing regarding the conditions here. You could have accomplished that differently. Instead of using a formula evaluates to true, you could have done like all conditions here, or you could have put actually no conditions, and then add a check here to say, has the account been changed or is the case new? The reason I have not done that is because of performance, because as much as possible, you want to define the conditions in the start element here to avoid the system having to go into the flow to check additional conditions. This is definitely a more performant way of doing things, to define the condition on the start element rather than having the flow enter and then check a decision in there if there's no need to. So that's for the first flow, for the first requirement. Then our second requirement was, I want to create a task and send an email. Again, on a before flow, fast field update, we cannot do that. So we have no choice than to create a second flow. And it's going to be a different set of conditions. So again, the flow is on case. This time is only when the record is updated, because I've assumed that there's no timing when the case is going to be created and closed right away. Usually the case is created and then later in the process, you do an update and you close the case, which is why I've only selected here a record is updated. And my condition here, once again, it's a formula because I needed to access the VIP account on the parent, on the account linked to the case. And then I'm checking if the value of the pick list status is closed. And if that's the case, then we're going to enter this. And for this condition here, I've specified only when a record is updated to meet the condition requirement, because we want to trigger that action only the first time that the case is closed. If, let's say, you're doing, after the case is closed, you're doing several updates to the case, you don't want to re-trigger those email alert and task creation. So you only want to trigger that when the record is updated to meet the condition requirements. And then, as I mentioned previously, it's going to be an after save, so actions and related records flow. And then for the first requirement that was sending the email, well, you need to go through the immediate pass and then just send the email with a simple send email action. And then you can input whatever you want in the email body and subject. We did not specify what needed to go there. And then to be able to send the email properly, you also need to specify who's going to be the recipient. So in that case, our recipient, it was not specified, but you could have assumed that it's going to be the contact associated to the case. So the record, contact, and email associated to the contact. And then you need to specify as well the sender type. So you have a couple of options. I'm not going to go into the details, but you could choose default workflow user, or also you could have specified the org wide email address. And then for the second requirement, which was create a task 5 days after the case is closed. For that, I have created a scheduled path, which we've seen last week. So my scheduled path is named create task 5 days after case closure. It's basically the time source is when the case is updated, meaning when this flow entered. You could have done it differently as well. You could have done case close date. This will be the same thing, because as soon as the case is closed, it will enter this flow and it will set the close date as well. This is like a standard system behavior to set the close date. So basically it's 5 days after that. And then in that scheduled path, we have added the create task. So 5 days after that close date, we're creating that task with a description in it. And I have assigned the owner ID as the case owner. So the case record that owner ID is going to be the owner of the task as well. And the what ID is basically what is related to that task. In that case, it's the case ID. We want to link that task to the case that was closed. And yeah, in a nutshell, that's how you would have addressed and answered those two requirements. I don't know if there are some questions. I might be able to take on some of them, but just for the interest of time, if there are many, we can keep them for the end. But let me see, is there any question in the chat?
I think Prashant took care of it. There was one, but Prashant answered it, so we're all good.
Okay, great. And if you have any questions for the end, you can also come back to this later in the presentation. All right, so let me go back to the deck. Okay, so ScreenFlow. Let's start with just some introductions on and a reminder on what is ScreenFlow. So we've seen ScreenFlows in the very first session when Olivier introduced the different types of flows. ScreenFlows are basically flows that are used to interact with users, to provide them with a screen and guide them with a specific process to display message and collect information and then create records. So an example of a ScreenFlow that we have here would be to collect information during a sales call to ultimately be able to update or create an opportunity. ScreenFlow, and you'll see that later, but they can be distributed internally or externally. Olivier will show you how to distribute them, and we'll cover the most common use case on where you can distribute a ScreenFlow. Before going into the specificities and the details of ScreenFlow, a couple of comments on ScreenFlows. So the first one is, there are two additional, when you're going to choose to create a ScreenFlow, so when you do new flow and you select ScreenFlow, you're going to see and you're going to notice that there are two additional elements that are available. The first one is going to be screen, which is a component that you can add to your flow, and this is where you're going to configure each of your screens. This component is not available in record triggered flow, for example. And one below, rollback, is not available as well in any other types of flow. This is mainly used to, as we've seen last week, what is the definition of rollback? This is mainly used to undo a change that you would have done, such as creating a record. If you want to undo that create, you would use a rollback. And we'll see next week in the advanced session a bit more in details, like how you can leverage rollback to do more advanced things in regards to screen flows. Another specificities to screen flow, unlike the record triggered flow, there is no configure start option. So you'll see that in the demo, but the start element is not configurable. You can click on it and nothing will happen. The main reason is on a screen flow, the screen flow is launched by a screen that is displayed. There is no specific conditions to launch a screen flow. And then one last thing is that it's technically not a prerequisite to work with screen flows, but with Lightning becoming more and more popular, I would definitely encourage you to enable that setting if you are thinking about using flows, enabling Lightning runtime for flows. This is basically a feature that allows you to leverage the full power of flows and allows you to use components that leverage Lightning within a screen flow. So if you don't do that, you're going to be restricted in terms of which component you can use in a flow, and you might hit some errors at some point. So I would definitely encourage you to enable that. It can be done under the setup, process automation, and process automation settings. So couple of actually one terminology that is important when we talk about flow, and more specifically screen elements. This is the concept of flow interviews. So what is a flow interview? A flow interview is a running instance of a flow. It's basically the same thing as when we talk about an object and then we talk about the record. So if you can see on the right here, this is an illustration. Let's say that we have a create contacts and account flow. So this is our flow. You can have multiple, and you will have multiple interviews of your flow. Each interview corresponds to one execution of your flow. So again, same thing as a record, an object, an account object can have multiple records. Well, that's the same analogy here. A flow can have multiple interviews. What's important to know in the context of screen flow is that you can pause screen flow. And one of the use case for that is that it can be useful, for example, when you have a screen flow that is used by a call center and an agent. And when, let's say, you're on a call and the customer drops, or the customer, they can find some information that needs to be provided, you can pause the flow and go back to that flow later, and that will keep and save the information that you previously entered into the flow, and you can basically resume from where you left off. What's important to know also for pause flow is that this is something you need to enable as well. It's not enabled by default, so you need to do that under process automation settings. You have a specific setting for that as well. And then pause flow interviews can be resumed, as I just mentioned, but they can also be deleted if for some reason they're not needed anymore. And you can monitor and view pause flow under the setup, process automation, pause and fail flow interviews. So let's talk about screen element. So screen element is basically the element in which you construct your screen. And this is the element I was referring to earlier that is only available within a screen flow. So to add a screen element is the same thing as any other element as what we've seen so far. You just drag and drop the element on the canvas. And then when you open that screen element, you're going to see that there are three main properties on that screen element. The first one is screen element properties, which is what we see here in that section. And in there, you're going to define the label of your flow, its API name, and you can enter some description in terms of what that flow is doing. Then the second section that we're going to have is the header of the flow. In that header, it's going to basically display, if you choose to display that header and select that show header, it's going to display the name of your flow, the label of your flow, as you can see here. So if you don't want to display that, you just have to unselect that show header. And then show help text. This is just going to, right now on that screenshot, it's not selected. But if you select that option, it's just going to add a help text icon here, and you can provide more information on what is the purpose of that screen and what you should, and provide some guidance into what you should do in that screen. And then lastly, on the flow, the screen properties, you have the configure footer. Again, same thing as for the header, you can choose to hide the footer. But if you do that, it's going to also hide what we call the navigation bar. As you can see here, the navigation bar contains all the elements that allows you to navigate from one screen to the other. or to navigate basically through the flow and to finish your screen flow once you're done. Something to point out here is that the next button or finish button is the same button. It's just that the label is going to change where you are in your flow. So if you have multiple screens, if you are in the last screen, the button is going to say finish. If you have a screen after this one, the button is going to say next, but those are exactly the same buttons. And you also have the pause button here, which if you do, you're going to see your flow under the post-flow interviews, which is a component that you can add in your Lightning pages. And you would see all your flows that have been paused, and you can resume them from there. So screen components is basically what you put in your screen element to construct your screen. You have different type of screen components that you can put. So you have input, display, custom, and fields beta. And we're going to quickly glimpse through the different screen components that are available under each category. So the first to start with is input. As you can see, there's quite a lot of them. We're not going to go through each of them. For information, I have provided a link here that describes each of them. What's important before going into the details of some of them is that first of all, the way you add screen components to a screen is that you just drag and drop them into your screen, and you'll see that in the demo. But each element comes with their own properties. It can be address, checkbox. And so based on the component that you add on the screen, you won't have to fill all the exact same fields because not all the components are the same. Usually you'll find some attributes that are common, such as like the label of your screen of your components and some property in terms of is it required or not? Is it a field that is required? But then based on the components, you might have different properties or attributes to fill. So couple of components to mention here that are interesting. Address. So address, if you put that component on your screen, it's basically a bundle of different fields that constitute an address. So if you'd add that component into a screen, you would see multiple fields such as the street, city, country, and province, for example. And instead of having to add all those fields one by one, you can just add the address field. And then you can configure the properties in terms of is it required or not, and additional properties. Display image, it actually shouldn't be under the input category, but this is how they've done it. This is just a component to allow you to display an image in your flow. So this is more of a UI component to display something, a specific image within a screen. Then what do you have? You have email here. Email would be a field to store a specific email address. You could technically accomplish the same thing with like the text screen components, which is there to basically store text value and to request for text input. It's just that it comes with additional properties, such as you can pre-populate the field with a formatting of a specific format of email address, and you can add additional validations that would be more complex to implement with a text. What else? You have the lookup. Lookup component is really interesting if you want to be able within a screen to search for existing records within your database. So lookup is definitely worth looking into. And then, yeah, all the other one I will let you explore in more details what they are. I would definitely suggest to play a bit with it. So once you have your org set up, try to add each of the components to see how they render and what is the properties that comes with each of them. Then the display screen components, we only have two for now. Display text. So display text is just if you want to display some instructions in your component. So as you can see here on that flow, the description here is a display text. This is not editable, as the name mentions. So this is just to give instruction on your screen. And then section. This is something pretty new, and I hadn't done ScreenFlow in a while, and I noticed that not too long ago, and this is actually quite an improvement because it allows you to organize your screen component to give a better experience. So basically, it allows you to determine how you want to put your fields on the layout, and you have a way to put different sections within the screen. Before, it was only one field per row, and you could not change that unless you were doing custom components. So this is really a great improvement to determine how you want to structure your screen. And then lastly, we have something that is in beta, and it's important to mention it because if you decide to try it and use it, you need to know that Salesforce is currently not providing support for this, or not full support, because this is a beta feature. And actually, I have not used it for any client. So I've just done some research and investigation. But from what I've seen, this is a new functionality that allows you to take fields and add fields on the screen directly from a Salesforce object. So instead of saying, I'm going to add a text field and the property is going to be required, or I'm going to add a pick list field, you can directly select field from an object, and the fields is going to come with the attributes defined on the object. So if there is any help text, if the field is required on the object setup, all of those properties are going to come when you're going to add the field onto the layout. To use that feature, you're going to need to define a record variable. And if your record variable already contains some values from, let's say, a get that you did, those values are going to be pre-populated on the screen. So let's say you have done a get contact and your contact first name is John Doe. Well, if you add that full name and your variable is the contact that you got, you're going to see here John Doe as the full name because this is the name in the variable. Again, this is a beta feature. Choice resources. So we've not gone through those in details, but in the input component, you can choose, you have radio buttons, pick list, multi-pick list, and other choices component. A key part of configuring those choices component is defining what are the choices that go under them. And so basically the choices, you have different options to configure those choices. You have choice, collections choice set, pick list choice set, and record choice set. So choice, the first option, is basically choice that you manually define in the flow. So as you can see on the example that I have right here on the screen, those are choices that I have manually defined, yes and no. And you define the label and the value associated to those choices. Then collection choice set is basically you generate a set of choices from a collection of records. And then you can have the label that is something different from the value. So the label can be, let's say, the account name, but the values can be the account ID. Pick list choice set is basically you take a pick list and the values from a specific field from an object. So when you do that option, you have to specify what is the object and which pick list are you looking for. And then record choice set is you generate a set of choices using a filter list of records. So this is similar to the collection choice set, but in that record choice set, you basically define the criteria to get your records here. Component visibility. So within a screen, you have the ability to define conditional visibility to specify, for example, that this screen component, this field should be only visible if specific conditions are met. And those conditions can be any values that were defined in the same screen. So in the example that Olivier will show you in that screenshot that I have, do you want to use an existing account? Based on the answer of that question here, we're going to determine if we display the account component here or the account name component. So the condition, as I was saying, can use any values, and the way you construct them is you define the operator for the condition. Is it AND or custom logic? So this is pretty similar to what we've seen when we define conditions within a flow for, let's say, the entry conditions for entering the flow. And then just to note that the screen components that have a visibility filter associated to them, you'll see, you'll be able to recognize them with the this icon that you have, that eye icon, which means that there is a visibility criteria that is assigned. Validate input. So this is another component that you can do in a flow, in a screen flow and within a screen component. This is basically used to validate the input in terms of what has been entered into a specific screen component. And then you can provide guidance to the user in terms of what needs to be inputted into that that field. You can specify the error message, as you can see here on the right. So it's actually a two-part process. The first one is to define the error message, and then it's to define the formula for triggering that error. So in that example that we have here, If the account name is, the length of the account name is not equal or more to 5 characters, then you'll have an error. Just a quick note here that the condition, it's not that validation rule, it's the other way around. In validation rule, you're defining the condition to trigger the validation rule. Here it's the condition to ensure that the validation is going to pass. So it's you need to think the other way. Provide help. So really quickly, this is same thing as the help text that you can provide on a field when you're building fields internally within Salesforce. If you decide to add text to the provide help or help text section, this will add the icon that we can see here. And when the user is going to hover that icon, they're going to be able to see the help text for that specific field. And then lastly, before passing it over to Olivier, some flow design considerations. It's really important to understand that if you're placing a create element or any data element, create or update between 2 screens, that data element or that create record or update record is going to be executed right away. It's not going to wait for the flow to be completed to execute, which means that if, let's say, you have a user that is doing screen 1, then going to screen 2, and then for some reason does not complete the flow fully and exit the screen, your record is still going to get created if you design your flow that way. So it's really important as you're designing your flow to think about where to place those create elements, because if you don't want orphan or incomplete records to be created, you shouldn't place create records between different screens. Another way to avoid that is also to use rollback elements, and we'll see that in next week's session in more details.
Okay.
Now I'll pass it over to Olivier for distributed screen flow.
So I'll jump in to go over how to distribute the screen flow. Then we'll look at input and output value, and then I'll go into the demo of the flow. So first of all, screen flows are super flexible. They can be distributed pretty much everywhere in Salesforce, and they're like your best friend whenever you want to help your crew gain productivity, I would say. So you can distribute them pretty much in a lot of places. So for example, you can distribute them in Lightning pages, in actions, on the utility bar, on an experience builder page, on a Lightning component, in a Visualforce page, on a web tab, or even on a custom button. Then we can look at a couple of, I would say, use cases that will work well for those screen flows. So I would say the most common use case. The first one is on the Lightning record page. You can pretty much put the screen flow. I use this function all the time. It's super easy to help different users capture some information or create different records needed on a Lightning record page. You can think about our flow where we create contact for a related account, for example. Then we got an action button. Action button. So you want to create a button that triggers the screen flow. You just create an action, and it's done as easily as creating a button in the object manager. Super useful. Again, super flexible. Then you get using the utility bar. Using the app manager, you can configure the utility bar to display a screen flow. Using this will allow you to call a screen flow from pretty much everywhere in the org, as long as you are in the desired app. So this is super powerful tool, and that's helpful whenever someone needs to do a global action all the time, for example, or anything like this. So using the utility bar in the app manager is super helpful this way. Finally, you got the Experience Cloud page. So you can drop flows as a component as the same thing as a Lightning record page in an Experience Builder page. This is as easy as using the Lightning record page, for example, and it allows you to capture any information in a screen flow, let's say, for example, from a supplier that will use your portal or anything like this. And you can also use flow, like it's another thing that I didn't put there, but even to monitor login and validate identity of your users in your Experience Builder Cloud. So flow is a super powerful tool. So then this leads me to talk about the input and output variable. Whenever you create a variable in the flow builder, it will ask you if you want to make the variable available for input and out, or available for input. Whenever you put a variable available for input, it means that you want to put input a value to this variable using outside context. For example, passing the record ID of the account you're triggering the flow on. If you use available for output, this variable will be useful, let's say, to be referenced in an extra subflow or outside the flow. So it can be like, let's say you input a value and then you do some stuff and you want to expose a new value of a variable. So that's how you'll use available for output. Then this leads me to talk to you about the record context. Let's say I want to trigger a screen flow on an account page, and I want to use the account I'm triggering the flow on to do any action, link a contact for this one or create an opportunity related to it. You will have to use a variable called record ID, and it's cap sensitive. So small record, cap I and D. This will allows you to capture the ID of the account you're triggering or any object you're triggering the flow on using an action, for example. And this value can be either text or a record. If you use text, it will only capture the ID of the account. And if you use record, it will capture all the value of an account. So let's say it's very powerful because it saves you a get, for example, it saves you a limit, and it will capture all the information of the account you're in if you use a record ID, for example. So this is, I would say, in a nutshell, the input and output value. And then this leads me to the demo. During the demo, basically, what we'll do, we'll recreate together the flow where we create an account and link contact to it if we require it to. We'll then look at how to distribute it in a utility bar on the home page or in a Lightning page, and we'll see different DML operations, how to use a loop, anything like this. So in this, I'll start sharing my screen, and screen 2 here, so that's good. I might change a bit the way I wanted to create the flow to be a bit quicker. What I'll do is I'll use the flow we created and I'll go in detail on the different element of the flow to be a bit mindful of times. So this is what this flow looks like from the inside. If you guys remember from where we started, from our first session, we'll recreate the flow where it asks you, do you want to create an account? And then relate contacts to it. First thing to do, since the flow will be used in a lot of places, it's to look, do we have our record ID value populated? This is done using a decision where we populate the outcome, yes, no. And for this, we use account record ID, where we'll see, is it null, true, then we do an action. If it's not, we do the other action. This leads us to the interesting part of this demo, the screen here. So we have a screen where we have the first display text here, where we just put a little description of what the flow is about. Then we have a toggle. The toggle, yes, no. As you can see here, you need to give it API name. You put a label in there. You want to let know is it active or not, because you can display on the label, for example. And that's it for this one. This will return us a Boolean, yes, a true or false, that will allow us to control the visibility, as you'll see later, for these two fields. The first field is a lookup record. This is a super useful record where you need to configure all the fields here. So the API name will be the API name of the field you want to capture. Then the field API name on the record, so on the account, so account ID here. The label accounts. Then you got the object API name, so the contact, and that's it. You have also like the API, like since it's on the contact, you want to look at this here, and you can look at the label and the different integration point. Then you got your text field, simple text element that is here. You put a label, an API name, we put it as required, and no default value. We have one thing here, as you can see, the little I, is that we control the visibility according to the toggle element here. As you can see, those two elements, account and account name, they have set component visibility and a condition. So we can use and, always, condition in custom logic, like the classic we have in Salesforce. And we call our element here, use existing account value. And if it's not equal to true, we'll display this. And if it's equal to true, we'll display this one. So this way we have the two different elements, like if I go here and I toggle this here. If there was a record ID already, so if the flow was already on an account page, for example, it will lead us to this screen, the second screen, where we want to create a contact. So we'll have our two text components that are required, first and last name, and then we'll have a radio button. Radio button work using choices. You configure them using a label, is it required? And then you can choose multiple options or not. Obviously, radio button will use only one. You can also use a pick list if you want. And then you'll input your choices. Let's say I want to add the third choice, for example, I create a choice here. And then I can call it, for example, I'll create a new resource. It'd be, as you can see here, I have only access to the choice resources. Choice, I'll call it this way. You can do not use, and then the value of my choice, I'll say test, for example. And then whenever I click this choice, it will give me the test choice whenever I want to do a decision using this choice. So for example, as you can see here, do not use, and you can see the test choice. So that's just for, once we have all the information you want, as William said, usually we don't want to, only in some specific case, want to create a value between screen. We'll go and create our single contact using assignment. So as we always do, we use a record variable, which is a contact variable, and then we give them value. And we referred here a first name, as you can see. First name is a screen component. So it's like we say we pass the value of the screen to this field. We'll then add it to our list. So we have our single contact and we assign it to our list. This will create a collection of contact. Here, this is a record variable contact, but when I wanted to create the record variable, sorry, but I'll go there. I checked allow multiple values here. Then we want to know, you remember the radio button, do you want to create additional contact? Then we use this using our decision. Our decision, if it was yes, we go back to the screen. I'll show you a bit later. If it's not, it stays as default and continue the flow as desired. As you can see here, we say the resource, do you want to add another contact? So that's our choice resource, our screen component, equal and the value of our choice, which is yes. If it is yes, we use, I'll use another one so you can see a bit better. So in the flow editor, you can assign connect an element. So actually, I'll use here reroute a connector, so you can select which connector I want to link it to. So I'll go there and then I connect it to my screen here. Obviously, it won't change anything since it's already there. So if I do this, I'll go back to my screen and then I'll recreate in contact and add it to my list. As is, it stays in the list and it's good. Then we want to see, do we want to create an account or do we want to use an existing account? Same thing, it's a decision as we're used to. If we want to create an account, we will create an account here. So just basically a create record, one account, and name equal account name. The account name is the screen component we input in the top. Then this brings us to what we want to do with our contact. We want to, because we want to attach them to the account once it's created. And that's a little trick. Whenever you create an account, you can reuse this component here, and it will give you the ID of the account so you can attach it to a contact. First thing first is to loop over our contact. So as you can see, our contact record list as you created earlier, our collection variable, it's in a loop. And then the loop will create a value for a variable for you, which is kind of the current contact you have in your loop. This will be accessed using the value, and then you say the account ID of my contact now equals the create account record. So you refer the flow element, as you can see here. You now have access ID from create account record. So whenever you use a create element, you do the DML in the flow, you can you can reuse the ID of the newly created element. So that's a thing that's super useful to know. And then since we never want to do any DML operation or very rarely do a DML operation in a loop, we'll assign our contact to our contact to create final list, which is another collection, since we want to create a new collection with the updated contact. We don't want to create the contact that are not part of that are not linked to any account. If we didn't have to create any account, we'll loop again over our contacts, and again we'll decide with the decision: is my account record ID null or not? If it's not null, we'll use our record ID to populate the account on the contact. If it's null, we will populate the contact with our record ID here. And finally, we'll add this to our final list. And again, as you can see, it's our final list to create. So, and finally, since we use the same list and we can reuse a collection, we can only have one create contact depending on the different path, and we'll just pass the list to our create contact record collection, and it will create all the contact we wanted to create in the org. So this is overall our demo of the screen flow. You have lots of stuff to, as you can see, like screen flows are super flexible, and you can do pretty much almost everything you want with those screen flow, as long as you're comfortable manipulating the different screen component.
And if I can add here, don't be like it. This flow was pretty complex, and we mixed a couple of things because we mixed some of the concept we've seen last week with screen flow. So you can definitely build simpler screen flows. The complexity here resides in we want to create two different type of objects and records at the same time and link them together. So account and then associate the contact with them. So that's why we have to do all that complex logic of looping through the result and things like that. So don't worry if you're like, it's complex. It is complex. It's a more advanced flow, But you can definitely build simpler screen flows here. We try to build on what we've seen last week.
And one last thing might be, I can show you the simple way of how to add a flow to a Lightning record page. Would be, again, if we are in our own page and we click edit page, it will allow you to just drag and drop a flow component. Here, so you have the flow component here. Takes a bit of time to load. And you just choose a section and wherever you want to put it. Honestly, that's strange because I was in my own page and it opened my case record page, but let's say we were at the right page, and you can pretty much drop it everywhere. And then you go here and you can pick the flow you want and pass the value to the record ID that any variable that you put as available for input. You can either pass a value, or if you click this, you say pass record ID, it will automatically populate record ID on the variable you want. So this is it on how to the demo of the flow. Then I can go quickly over the exercise, and then we'll be able to go over the Q&A. So the exercise for our screen flow here is, so it's similar of like same scenario as last time. So in order to improve the response speed of the customer service department, the customer support manager at OW Telco wants the team to gain efficiency when they capture information about customers' problems. In order to do this, he has a Salesforce department to build a team, an interactive form that will allow them to create new cases and relate them to account. They will have to fill the following field: account, if it exists in the org. If it doesn't exist, the rep will have the opportunity to create it from the screen if he wants. The subject of the case, the type, the origin, and the priority. The pick list will have to always be in sync with their related pick list in the case object. And the rep will be able to trigger the form from an account and from their own page. After thinking a bit more about it, the customer support manager would like the flow to also be able to be triggered from pretty much everywhere from everywhere in the org. So this is it for the exercise. This now, thank you for being here, and this leads us, I would say, to the Q&A/draw from Prashant.
And just on the exercise, I mean, we're taking almost the same use case as what we've demoed. Again, it's a pretty complex. So if you're like, it's too complex, I'm not going to do it, you can try simple steps, like just try to create the screens at least, and we'll see next week how to create the logic to create the records. But at least give it a try to the screen, because in that session today, we saw a couple of things, but we saw mainly how to add screen and create screen flows. So you can give it a shot at least to create the screens. So I don't know if we have any questions. Let me see. I don't think we have any unanswered questions. Am I right, Prashant? Or
Yeah, I think Neil was also tracking that, so I'll let Neil close it out as well as do the certification voucher. So
I see Ryan has his hand raised.
please go ahead. If anybody has a question, feel free to unmute him.
Thank you. I just had a question about from last week, the record triggered flow example. So the way I had set mine up was quite similar to yours, but I had done two decision elements. So the first decision asks, is the account null, yes or no? And then if it's null, it sets the priority to low priority. And then the next decision asks, is the account VIP, yes or no? So my question is like, how do decision elements, like, would those be like cumbersome, like from a performance perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, like as much as possible, try to minimize the number of elements that you have. You'll see that next week as well, but there is a limit in terms of the number of elements that can be executed in a flow. So try to be as efficient as possible when you're building your flow and try to minimize the number of elements. And I'm curious, you had 2 decision elements in your flow. If let's say it went to one branch, then was it going to then the second decision element? Was it checking if it was a VIP account as well?
Exactly. So like if the account was not a null value, then it proceeds to the next decision, which asks, is it a VIP or not?
Yeah, I see. That's another way of doing it. Like there's like you can be creative while doing flows, but as much as possible, you try to optimize the flow for performance. And I think the way you've built it works. It's just if you want to be more performant, try to merge that into one decision element.
And one thing to kind of also like, as less as possible, like any of the pink, I would say block, the orange block, like the decision, they impact a bit performance, but way less than any of the pink ones. So like on a smaller flow, like the impact of the decision become greater when you have like a bigger flow. Like on a smaller flow like this, it doesn't really change much.
That's good to know. Thank you for answering my question.
Any other questions? Cool. I'm sure you guys, after reviewing the exercise and give it a shot, you'll have questions next week. So don't worry, we'll go through the exercise and the solution in details next week.
Yeah.
So Prashant, over to you then.
Thank you so much. I'll let Neil wrap this up with the spin wheel. Thank you once more, William and Olivier. Fantastic session.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
All right. So how many vouchers are we giving away again tonight?
I do.
Prashant? 2. Okay. So we will choose 2 from the attendees. Let's get the first one. All right. So the first one is I'm sorry if I pronounce it incorrectly. Emoisoli. Are you here?
That's correct. I'm here.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will reach out to you separately after the meeting to claim your prize. The next one would be Hannah Binovic. Are you here, Hannah?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, congratulations to the winners. We will reach out to you separately. And yeah, thank you to the speakers and to the participants. See you again next week.
Thank you, everyone. And
Bye, everyone.
yeah, you can email me the first name, last name, email address. I'll just put that on chat. But again, thanks again, William and Olivier. Fantastic session. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of the week and great long weekend for those in Canada. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.